God is good. And all the time. I have to tell you that I usually, when I'm in our church, because we're in 3 morning services live and then 2 extras video, it's a complicated deal. I always like to sing, and I like to just go at it. And I've had to train myself when I come to services not to sing because I run out of voice by the time I get into 3rd service. So I came to Brown City Camp and said, you know what? It's not a 3-service gig, so I'm going to let her fly. And I got to tell you, that is not a good idea, because as much as we speak here, sometimes it gets a little raspy. But I have to tell you, didn't you just enjoy singing? Didn't you just enjoy that? Wasn't that great? I just loved it to hear you. My mom and dad were in their 90s, and I stopped over at their place one day, and I got into a discussion as they were talking about what we're singing in church. And music has changed, and a generation has different things they like. And my mom was saying, man, I wish we could sing some of those old ones a little bit more often. And they're mixed in. And Dad looked at her, and he said, Ann, those new songs, I wished I had the notes in front of me, because I'd like to see the notes and see my part. He was a 4-part singer guy. But he said, I got to tell you, even in those new ones, I look at the words, and they are pretty good. And he said, they can bless me. And I thought, isn't that something? A guy 90 years old could switch hit, could go from old stuff to contemporary stuff and enjoy it all as it gives glory to God. And thank the Lord. And we've got some country style. You guys, David, you and your West Virginia stuff, oh my goodness. The Lord can deliver you from that, brother. He always talks about his wife is having south in the mouth or whatever it is. And Rob, you got that too. You guys really like that country western stuff, don't you? You get into that. There's a few of you enjoy country western music, don't you? Sure. Do you know how to get your dog back and your girlfriend back? Play the song backwards, and they'll come home, because it's all about pain and losing. Hey, can I just have a moment of just stupid foolishness with you? Thank you for permission. Some of you have heard some of these. My list changes because I have this thing, David, where I like to collect the 10 silliest country western song titles. And I kind of do these, and I move them around in the rankings. So are you ready to go? These are real, actual country western song titles. I didn't make these up. These are real. Here we go. And I'll just judge by your response whether they make the cut or not. Number 1, her teeth was stained, but her heart was pure. That's real, David. Number 2, my John Deere was breaking your field while your dear John was breaking my heart. This next one's just horrible, just terrible. I still miss you, baby, but my aim's getting better. That is a real country western song title. I would have wrote you a letter, but I couldn't spell yuck. I am not making this up. These are real country western song titles. You may put me in prison, but you can't keep my face from breaking out. This one caused you a little sore spot. You're only a splinter as I slid down the banister of life. Here's one that is really deep, is profound. This has deep emotions to it. I'm just a bug on the windshield of life. Isn't that something? But my all-time favorite, Mama, get a hammer, there's a fly on Papa's head. That's my best one. Well, let's go to work. I want you to start out with me. First of all, we're just going to go to that same verse we've been working on. And we're working on this thing of learning what it is to stand. Now, if you weren't here Wednesday I shared with you the findings from Robert Clinton from Fuller Seminary, as he researched all these leaders, and he discovered in the Bible that only 30% of those that he could have full documentation on finished well. They remained standing to the very end. And so there's something that burns inside of me that says, God, I want to stand. I don't want to get knocked over. I want to stand firm. So our verse we're looking at is 1 Corinthians chapter 15, verse 58. And this is the third day, because if you're like me, sometimes it takes a little bit of driving to get the truth into our heart. So on your feet, stand right now. Come on, you can do it. I want you to stand, and we're going to read this verse together out loud. I'm going to put it up on the screen. You can have it there. Here we go. Are you ready? Now, you should know this by heart now. I'll try by heart, and if I mess up, forgive me. Here we go. Therefore, my dear brothers, stand firm. Let nothing move you. Always give yourselves fully to the work of the Lord, because you know your labor in the Lord is not in vain. How are you to stand? Firm. And you are to stand firm how much of the time? Always. And what should move you? Nothing. Now let's do it again, one more time. Therefore, my dear brothers, stand firm. Let nothing move you. Always give yourselves fully to the work of the Lord, because you know that your labor in the Lord is not in vain. You may be seated. Now, it is amazing the things that can just knock us off course, that can knock us over. And just out of nowhere, something can happen that just knocks you flat to the ground, and you say, where did that come from? Here's a picture of my grandson and I. About 3 weeks ago, we had decided on a Monday morning we were going to do a little longer bike ride. I thought, I wanted to do 100 miles, but I really hadn't ridden much this year. I wasn't prepared. I'm about 25 pounds over from the last time I did a century. So I told him, I said, let's go out and let's do a metric century at this 100K and 62 miles. And so he came over, and we got on our bikes, and we started out. Had a great time. We just really enjoyed it. The first 50 miles were just pure delight. They were incredible. And we didn't realize why they were so incredible. There was a slight breeze behind us. And those first 50 miles were great. He looked at me and said, Grandpa, we could do 200 miles today. And I thought, kid, you're nuts. We'll be lucky to get 100 if we're going to do it. And we're riding and having a good time. We went all the way actually from Napanee to LaGrange, if you know the area over there. We get to LaGrange. I stop and say hello to a guy that's a friend of mine there. We turn around, we start back, and we are going in now into a headwind. It is now 90 degrees. We didn't eat right. We didn't have enough hydration. Everything that you could do wrong on a bike ride, we did wrong. And I'm thinking to myself, that 100K is sounding pretty sweet right now. I'm going to pick up the phone, call Christy, get the van, come and get us. I got my metric 100, my century, 100K, not 100 miles. So I'm starting to cramp up really bad in my legs. It's just getting brutal. And I've done this before, but I always had trained and I was in shape. And here I am with a 19-year-old kid, and this is the year that he's passed me in riding ability. Up until this year, I could whoop him, but those days are over. And so I'm getting off the bike, and I'm just I'm cramping up terrible. I'm beating out those cramps, and I'm saying I can't show this kid how tired I am, how bad I am. So maybe, I'm just like, well, I'm going to pray a while, and I just kind of beat out those cramps. So I'm actually on a bicycle trail. I take my bike, I put it to the side, and I'm kind of wondering, am I going to make it? And I'm stretching out everything I could stretch out. It's brutal. And as I'm stretching out, all of a sudden, I get hit by a biker. I mean, I'm standing there, and this guy's riding his bike, and he was looking at his phone, and he just flat out hit me. And I didn't know what. I'm laying over the side, and he's laying on the middle of the pavement, and his bike's over here. And I'm saying to myself, what just happened? And he said, are you okay? And I felt like saying, my lawyer's number is, and didn't say it. And I thought to myself, this just came out of nowhere. I mean, and so I looked at my grandson, and I said, Trace, you should have warned me, because my back, he came from the side. Trace was standing beside me. He said, I saw him coming, but I knew he'd have enough sense to just kind of swerve around you. I was on the side. I wasn't in the middle. Do you know, when I got back on the bike, I thought to myself, that's life. We're out of nowhere, at the weakest spot, you just get slammed. And you're laying there dazed and shocked and saying, what just happened to me? What just happened to me? And I thought about it when I got back on my bike. Therefore, dear brothers, stand firm. Let nothing move you. And I did get moved. But I made it. He looked at me and says, anything broken? And I said, no, I think I'm going to be okay. My pride was damaged. I looked at him and he said, is anything broken? He said, yeah, the screen on my cell phone. I said, yes, justice, you deserved it. Now, I want you to go over with me to Ephesians chapter 6, and we're going to just kind of park over to Ephesians chapter 6. So you need to see this, because what you're going to see in Ephesians chapter 6 is this concept of standing. Now, my goal today, as we kind of wrap up these 3 mornings that I've done, is to try to put inside of your DNA this indefatigable, strong, faith-filled thing that when you get blindsided, you're going to be able to just default back to 1 Corinthians 15:58. Therefore, my dear brothers, let nothing move you. Always stand firm. Always give yourself fully to the work of the Lord, because you know your labor in the Lord is not in vain. Stand. Now watch this passage in Ephesians chapter 6, verses 10 and 11. Here we go. And let's just read this. In fact, read it off the screen with me out loud. Just use those big voices again. Are you ready? Here we go. Ephesians 6, 10 and 11. Finally, be strong in the Lord and in his mighty power. Put on the full armor of God so that you can take your stand against the devil's schemes. Take your stand against the devil's schemes. So he's going to use the word stand 4 times. 1, 2, 3, 4. 4 times in this passage. Now, every time he uses the word stand, he's going to use it to identify something that could well knock us off course. This one is stand strong, there is an enemy. Stand strong, there is an enemy. There is an enemy that is going to be out to get you. Stand strong. Stand strong against the devil's schemes. Now, David has done an incredible job early on camp talking about spiritual warfare. Marcus has taught on spiritual warfare. You've heard us talk about this. Don't ever underestimate the schemes that Satan uses to destroy it. Now, do not operate as a victim, because we are a victor. He is defeated. He is a defeated foe. He is a liar. He's the thief. He's come to kill, steal, and destroy. But yet be wise as to the schemes he is going to use against you. I think we have a tendency to see things in the natural rather than the supernatural. And in the natural, we think, well, things just happen. And I don't want to go goofy, and I don't want to go weird, and I don't want to go off the rails. But I want you to understand there is an enemy that is doing everything he can to attack. I read something this week about a group of, and I don't know if it's documented, I don't know if it's true, but I thought, wow, I read about a group of Satanists that as they prayed, their Monday prayers every Monday was praying that God would take out pastors of churches, that he'd cause them to fail morally, that he'd cause them to compromise their beliefs. I thought to myself, wow. There are people who are going to absolutely delight at the fall of believers. Therefore, he says, so that you can take your stand against the devil's schemes. Now, go on a little bit further. Go to verse 12. Look at verse 12. Look at verse 12, what he says. For our struggle is not against flesh and blood, but against rulers, against the authorities, against the powers of this dark age, dark world, and against the spiritual forces of evil in the heavenly realm. Go on. Chapter 6, verse 13. Therefore, put on the full armor of God, so that when the day of evil comes, you may be able to stand your ground. I think Paul, writing this church, is again concerned that you've got to stand. Just like he was in Corinthians when he wrote the church at Corinth, and he ended all of his teaching, all that teaching. 1 Corinthians is loaded with all these messes in the church. By the way, I don't know if you know, ministry is messy. It's messy. And he comes to the end and says, stand firm. Now he goes to the church at Ephesus and he says, put on the full armor of God so that when the day of evil comes, you may be able to stand your ground. Stand strong. Therefore, put on the evil of, when the day of evil comes, you may be able to stand your ground. And after you have done everything, there are seasons there that he's going to talk about here. There are seasons that you have to be able to manage your way through. When he talks about standing, I think he's talking about the seasons of life where there is going to be a potential threat upon you. The issues that I faced that could knock me over in my 60s are very different than the issues I faced that could knock me over in my 40s, in my 20s. As you navigate the next season of your life, there are going to be different threats that are going to come across your life. Has seasons. Oh, I wish we were at the coffee shop right now. And I don't even drink coffee. I wish we were there because I'd like to talk to you about what season of life you're in right now. What season are you in? Where is it that you may have a point of vulnerability in this season of your life? Let's go on. Let's go on. There are seasons. Let me go back to verse 13. Therefore, put on the full armor of God so that when the day of evil comes, you may be able to stand your ground. And after you have done everything to stand. Now, this is what we call the victory stand. After it is all over, you are going to be able to stand on the victory stand. This is like the Olympics. I get all jacked up when I watch the Olympics. There's something about someone that has persevered, and they go and they play the national anthem, and those people are up there on the victory stand, and while everyone else has kind of had their track set and they've had it, they're able to stand. For us, our victory stand is to be able to finish life well and to hear Jesus say two words to us: well done, well done, well done. After you have done everything to stand. Now let me take you into verse 14. What's the first word of verse 14? First word, what's the word? Do you get the idea that he's trying to teach us something here? This is what we call the law of multiple reference when you study Scripture. Whenever a word is used multiple times, it is there for emphasis. Paul, again, is writing a church and saying, stand! You're getting knocked over. You're getting blindsided. Verse 14, stand firm then, with a belt of truth buckled around your waist, with the breastplate of righteousness in place, and with your feet fitted with the readiness that comes from the gospel of peace. In addition to all this, take up the shield of faith, with which you can extinguish all the flaming arrows of the evil one. Take the helmet of salvation, the sword of the Spirit, which is the word of God. And pray in the Spirit on all occasions, all kinds of prayers and requests. With this in mind, be alert and always keep on praying for all the saints. It's kind of interesting. This is fascinating. He starts off with the word stand, 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 stand. He ends with the word all, always, and he tries to tie those two things together. Stand strong, verses 14 to 18 says stand strong and have a game plan. Have a game plan that you're going to use. Have a game plan. You don't stand strong just accidentally. You have to have a strategy in place if you're going to be able to stand strong. So here's what I would do if I could sit down and we could coach each other one-on-one. I would like to talk to you about your strategy for remaining strong. What's it going to take for you to have this? Now, in football, the coach sits down, he draws out the X's and O's, draws where the play's going to go, and they don't go to the line of scrimmage and say, well, everybody just do what you feel like doing. They have a plan in place for how they're going to move that ball forward, get a first down, and ultimately get a touchdown. So what's your plan? What's your plan? It's an old management axiom that says if you fail to plan, you're planning to fail. You've heard that 1,000 times. So what is your plan? What are you intentional about to simply say, if there is a 70% probability, man, I hate that. A 70% probability that I may not finish well, I better have a strategy in place. What's your strategy? What are you going to do? What is it that you simply say, I'm going to get this strategy, I'm going to execute it right to the T as best I can? What is your game plan? I want to show you a picture of a book. It's really interesting. Years ago, the story is told of an old pastor that gave the books in his library to a younger pastor. And as he gave the books to the younger pastor was blown away that in all the margins there were these 3 letters written, YBH, YBH. And it was kind of circle something, and then it would go YBH. And the young guy, as he's reading this book, is just getting frustrated to all get out because everywhere in the book are these 3 letters, YBH. So he meets with the old guy, and he says, I don't understand. The book's great, and I love it, and I love the way you highlighted things, but what does this mean, YBH? The old man looked at the young fellow and said, let me tell you what it stands for. Yes, but how? Yes, but how? I agree with what you said. How can I get there? How can I do this? So let me close up our time by giving you 3 examples that you might use to put together your strategic plan to finishing strong. And what I'm going to do is and you can work this any way you want. I'm just going to choose 3 random ones that I look at, and I'm going to invite you to simply say, maybe when I go home, I'm going to have to set aside an hour. I'm going to have to sit down and draw up my plan for how I'm going to finish well. In this room right now, the majority of us are probably over 40, over 50, some are over 60, some of you are over 70. Wouldn't it seem wise for you to have a strategic plan in place, a game plan, like he talked about in Ephesians 6, in how you're to gird yourself as to how you're going to finish? I hope you have someone that has put a game plan for you in handling your personal finances. Just before I came up here, I got a text from a gal who said, Dave, can you put us in touch with somebody that's going to be a great financial planner? Her mother suffered a horrible tragedy in the family, and they need to figure out some things. And I thought, this is one smart daughter that says, hook us up with somebody that will help us build a strategic plan for mom so that she can cross the finish line not busted and broke. In fact, can I propose to you that most of you in this room have spent more time working on your financial plan for finishing life than you have your spiritual plan for finishing strong. And if 70% of us are not going to cross the finish line feeling strong, maybe we just ought to stop and say, I better put this plan together. So let me give you 3. Here we go. The first one is, I'm going to ask you to learn from Timothy. I'm going to ask you to learn from Timothy. Now, this could be a fun study for you to do on your own. And maybe what I'm going to do is to be a professor now, and I'm going to give you kind of assignments. And then you're going to have to work this all out on your own time. It's really fascinating on pedagogy. Paul, when he wrote Timothy, in 2 Timothy, he taught endurance. He came to the 3rd part of the lesson, and he basically said, figure this one out on your own. So maybe what I'm going to do is do this little thing where I'm going to say, you're going to have to figure some of this stuff out on your own as the Spirit of God leads you. But let's look to Timothy for a second. What do we know about Timothy? We know that Timothy put himself in a relationship with Paul to have a mentor in his life. There was somebody who was a mentor in his life, and that was Paul. Timothy allowed himself to go into a relationship where he's going to resist the urge to fly solo, and he's going to put people around him that are going to keep him on the rails. And not only did Timothy have a mentor, Paul talked to him in 2 Timothy chapter 2, verse 2, I want you to be a mentor. He said, the things that you have heard me teach you, teach to faithful men who will be able to teach others. So who do you have in your life that you are allowing them to pour into you, and who are you pouring into intentionally right now? Who is it? I wish we were in a group of 6 or 8 or at a retreat and we'd get around the table, and I would force you to go this way. In fact, this isn't a thing of maybe finding one person. What people do you have in your life that you are allowing them to speak truth into your life? Who do you have in your life that speaks truth into you spiritually? Who do you have in your life that you've allowed to walk into your closets with you and look around and see if there's dirty stuff in the closets? Who do you have in your life that has the courage to look at you and say, that wasn't your finest moment? You need to improve upon that. Who do you have? One of the problems we have with our faith today is in our generation, we've become very individualistic. And that is, it's just Jesus and me for each tomorrow, for every hope and every sorrow. And that is not the way God meant it to be. If you read the pastoral epistles, you are going to see this phrase so many times: one another, one another, one another, one another, one another. And can I tell you, in the body of Christ, we kind of stink up the house when it comes to doing one another really well. Because it's going to be me and my way and to do my thing. I came across something. It's really fascinating. We live in a neighborhood. When you pull into our subdivision, there's like a big, huge pond, and then a smaller pond, and then in the center, there's another pond. And geese have decided that they really like our neighborhood. One day, a while back, I counted 250 of them. And it's just stupid. It's just stupid geese. And they do not understand the rules in our neighborhood are no deposit, no return. And it is brutal in our neighborhood. It is brutal. You can't even walk on the sidewalks because they're just very discourteous. And so every night about 6:30, I see the geese as they're leaving our neighborhood and as they're flying east. And I have two thoughts when I see them flying east. Number one has to deal with a gun. And the fact that I am 18 feet from being out of the city limits, I could climb that fence. And in season, Jim, we could have a ball. In fact, my brother and I have been strategizing as to how we're going to do it because they fly over. And I'm just thinking they really would like to go to heaven, and I'd like to help them get there. One of our pastors on staff just absolutely loves birds. He's a bird freak. I don't like birds. And birds have their place. You can guess where it is. But geese are incredible because as they fly over our place, I begin to watch them. And they are really, in a sense, in the air when they're behaving themselves. They're very beautiful. They really are. Listen to this. Geese teach us 5 lessons. Listen to this. As each goose flaps its wing, it creates an uplift for the birds that follow. By flying in a V formation, the whole flock adds 71% greater flying range than if each bird flew alone. Any NASCAR fans in the house? Let's talk about Daytona and drafting. Let's talk about Talladega and drafting. There are 3 of us left. Let's talk about this thing that as you run those cars, if they run in formation, they gain strength by being in formation with other people. Being a biker, I always like to watch the Tour de France. They run in the peloton. And all of a sudden, if a guy has a problem, he breaks from the peloton, and he cannot catch the peloton because there is such a power of togetherness that happens when we run in formation. Number 2, when a goose falls out of formation, it suddenly feels the drag and resistance of flying alone. It quickly moves back into formation to take advantage of the lifting power of the bird immediately in front of it. Number 3, when the lead goose tires, it rotates back into formation, and another goose flies to the point position. Boy, I violated that one. Fatigue sometimes simply means maybe it's time for me to kind of get back and enjoy the draft. When we ride bike and we ride in groups, one guy will go out and he'll ride point, and then you ride in this whole drafting formation, and you put yourself about 6 to 8 inches behind the next guy's wheel, a little bit toward the ditch side inside, and you create this whole thing, and there is an unbelievable pull when you ride in formation. I can ride 5 miles an hour faster when I'm riding with a group than I can ride alone. It is incredible. You just are going, I've never ridden this fast before. This is incredible. Lance Armstrong. No, that's not a good name to use. Lance Armstrong, here I am. I can do this because there's power in that thing. Number 4, geese flying in formation honk to encourage those up front to keep up their speed. It's exactly what you do on the interstate. You know, the same thing. Number 5, when a goose gets sick, listen to this one. When a goose gets sick, wounded, or shot down, 2 geese drop out of formation and follow it down to help and protect it. Now, when somebody falls out of formation in ours, we just kick them in the ditch, you know. We shoot our wounded. They stay with it until it either dies or is able to fly again, and then they'll launch out with another formation or try to catch up with the flock. Now, this is why Paul, as he's working with Timothy, tries to connect him into the body. My numbers might be off. I believe it's in 2 Timothy when he closes out writing, and it might be first in 2 Timothy. Don't quote me on this. There are listed 27 names that Paul lists. By the way, 2 Timothy is the last thing Paul ever wrote. And there are 27 names listed. 7 of the names are people that just caused harm. They were just a pain in the backside. They were the ones that you would pray might find another church. 20 of the people were encouragers who did that. And Paul says to Timothy, fly in formation and keep encouraged. By the way, I love this. One of my favorite little verses is the last verse of 2 Timothy, the last thing that Paul ever wrote, the most prolific writer of the New Testament canon. You know what the last thing he ever wrote? He closes with, may the grace of God be with you all. The last thing he said to Timothy is, may the Lord be with your spirit. May the Lord be with your spirit. An old guy that had gotten beat up, prisoned, ran out of town, escapes in his life in a basket, beaten, cursed. He knew life. And he just puts a figurative arm around Timothy and he says, Timothy, may the Lord be with your spirit. Can I just say that to you today? May the Lord be with your spirit. We talked the other day about spirit wounds. May the Lord be with your spirit. Timothy was young. He didn't come off the right nationality. Let no man despise your youth. So what we're going to do, first of all, if we're going to build our game plan, we look to Timothy and say, what can I learn from Timothy? And I would challenge you to have, can I, just two things real quick. The first time, I think it was the first time I was ever here, it must have been in the 90s, early 90s. Tim Elmore was here doing student ministries. And I mentioned, I think in one of the messages, talking about one of the messages Tim preached and that I heard, Tim grabbed a hold of me here at Brown City. And he said, Dave, who do you have that is mentoring you? I didn't have anybody. I was spending all my time working with pastors and working with people, and I didn't have a mentor. And Tim looked at me square in the eyes, and he said, you are going to get in trouble if you don't have somebody that can mentor you who has gone further than you've gone in this thing. And I was so indebted to Tim. He actually arranged for me to develop a very close relationship with someone that became a coach to me and became a help to me. Now, the mentoring doesn't need to be formal. It doesn't need to be where you sit down and you sign a contract. It doesn't mean you have to get together every week, but it means I have someone that I'm going to look to. Can I tell you who has been a force in my life spiritually? Is that guy sitting right over there in the red shirt, Jim Keller. There have been so many times that Jim has kind of put his arm around me and encouraged me. There have been times that Jim and I have sat in board meetings, and I say, Jim, you got to help me. I'm struggling. Jim has been a great resource. Would I call Jim a mentor? I would call Jim a great friend that put his arm around me. And at times, I had to lean into him in that relationship. Now, I'm going to flip real quick. Who are you pouring into? I want to talk just for a second to some of you older ladies here today. There's a generation of younger women that are absolutely thirsty to have have an older lady pour into them. They're just thirsty. They're dying for it. And you have the idea that you're a dinosaur, you're no good, I've lost my beauty, I've lost my wisdom, this young, I don't even dress cool anymore, and I don't even know the terminology, they use words, and I don't really understand how they work. Can I tell you, I meet with more young women who tell me, I just wish I could find kind of like a mother figure. Just someone that will put their arm around me. Someone that will love me. Men, you can play a role. You don't have to sit down. You're not going to preach at them. You just cheerlead them. You just love them. Some men have grown up with an absentee father. Maybe that was Timothy's deal. And Paul came in and filled that role. Years ago, I was talking to someone about all the ancillary organizations that Campus Crusade had over all of its years. Bill Bright had all these things, family life, Dennis Ray, you take Josh McDowell, all these things, Paul Eshelman, Jesus Film, all these things. And someone told me the key to all those ancillaries that went off were so many of those were led by men who did not have a father figure in their life, and Bill Bright became the father figure for those men. And some of you men, it's time for you to flip roles now. The things that you've heard me teach you, teach others. I just believe, okay, now I'm off the rails, okay? Now I'm meddling. There is a generation of men who have gone absent in spiritual leadership in churches today. They've just gone absent. Some of our younger deacons came to me a few years ago and said, Dave, we have never done some of these sticky issues that we've got to deal with. And they asked for one of the men in his mid-70s to come back on because they said, we need someone that is proven and tested and tried, can kind of guide us through some of the sticky issues we have to face. Now, you've got to love me, but some of you guys have a retirement mentality. you got to love me, that just because you retired from work, you retire from kingdom service to the body of Christ. No. There is gold that you have, not in your checkbook, but in your knowledge, in your experience, in your wisdom. You can just say to some people in another generation, everybody just hold on. Just settle down a little bit. We're going to be okay. And when things are rattling and shaking David in the wrong way, and it's like it's going to come apart, some of you older men have the ability to say, we're going to be fine. We're going to be okay. Timothy teaches us this thing, that flying solo is a sure way for a head-on collision. And I want to be in the 30%. And so I want to look to Timothy. Real quickly, let me give you the last two. The next one is actually Daniel. Daniel is fascinating because Daniel teaches us a lot about standing firm. Standing firm of it's being lonely. There are three basic principles that Daniel gives me that I want to put into my life. Number one, make up your mind ahead of time what you're going to do. Make up your mind ahead of time what you're going to do. Don't wait in the moment, but Daniel stood firm because he had decided when the pressure comes on, here is my default mechanism. Here's my default mechanism. Number two, Daniel knew when and how to take a stand. He knew when and how to take a stand. You know, we see Daniel as this guy that said, I will not bow my knee, as an obstinate, mean-spirited guy. Do you know Daniel actually went to the king and asked for permission to go on the diet that he wanted to be on rather than the food they were going to serve him? He wasn't mean-spirited about it. Listen closely to me. You can be dead right in your position and dead wrong in how you handle it. Now, I want you to hear that again. You can be dead right in your position, but dead wrong in the way you handle it. When I was a freshman in college, something happened on the campus I was going to that I thought was an absolute abomination. It was a film that was produced by the World Council of Churches, and it kind of made Jesus out to be a clown on a cross. And I don't know why in the world somebody wanted to show that thing. And I decided that I was single-handedly going to take that thing down. And boy, I tell you what, I got the troops together, and we made a statement about heresy, and I fought with everything in my body. And we took that thing down. An old pastor came to me, put his arm around my shoulder, and he said, David, would you listen to me? You were dead right in your position. Shouldn't have been shown. You were dead wrong in how you handled it. You can contend for what you believe without being contentious. I think Jim sometimes invites me to come because I'm a pastor. And I think like a pastor. And I think sometimes adding a pastoral flavor to things adds a little bit of a different taste. Some of you in your local churches, your churches are going through tough changes. This is a hard time to minister. I was with a pastor last night. We looked at each other, and as we prayed together, I told him, pastoring now is 10 times harder than it was when I started. It is tough. It is hard. It is difficult. And some of you in this room need to learn the spirit of gentleness in standing for what you believe to be right. And some of the changes have gone too far. And some of the changes may not be healthy. And sometimes the speed of change may not be respective of certain people. But could I ask one thing of you? To do it in a spirit of gentleness and kindness and maturity. And model for people that we're not going to be the type of people, if we don't get our own way, we're going to fight over it. Learn what it is to do what Daniel did when he knew when and how to confront an issue and take a stand. Number 3, always believe then that God will bless your efforts. And you take that stand. You stay true to your mission. Timothy had a mentor. Daniel never strayed from his mission. Let me give you the last one. The last one is my friend Elijah. I mentioned him the other day, my friend Elijah. Elijah teaches us so much. Stand firm, let nothing move you. Elijah teaches us what happens in 1 Kings chapter 19 when he became so depleted in his physical resources that he wanted to throw in the towel. I talked to you about this before. Elijah, after the prophets of Baal had done such amazing things in calling down fire from heaven, and God had used him in such a great way, and all of a sudden he takes off and he starts running, and he says, Lord, let me die, I want to die. And Elijah teaches us a principle that we have to take care of ourselves physically, emotionally, spiritually, and we have to let the healing power of God restore and refresh us. And I talked about Elijah a little bit on Wednesday when we talked about this. Now, I want to close by asking you about your game plan. What is your game plan? I've not come to put fear into you. I've come to put motivation into you so that you'll be a part of the 30% that are really going to finish well. I want you to be able to say, here is my strategic plan. In fact, I would really challenge you to sit down and to draw it out. Here is the plan that I'm going to take so I can finish well in life. Let me give you some homework assignments. Here we go. Here's some homework questions. Question number 1, what tactics might the enemy be using on me? Number 2, where am I most vulnerable to fall? Number 3, what season of life am I in right now? What season of life am I in right now? Number 4, what specific steps can I take to build spiritual strength? And number 5, at whose feet should I sit to learn more about standing strong? Whenever I preach a camp, whenever I go outside of my own sphere of ministry, I always remember back to the day that I came this close to being a casualty. Some of you have heard me tell my story. Pastoring 3 years, discouraged, depressed, down, defeated. Didn't really like the church all that well in that moment. There were some great people. I still love them today, but there were problems. I took over a very, very tough situation. First Sunday we were there were 24 people in the church, and the church had split twice in the preceding 7 years, and people were bruised and battered, and I wasn't interested in the healing ministry. I was interested in an aggressive ministry to impact our community. And I got so discouraged. I'll never forget driving into the district superintendent's office and taking the keys to the church and sitting across the table from the district superintendent and throwing the keys to the church down and saying, I'm done. I'm through. I'm over. And as I took those keys and threw them down, something inside me said, go do something you're going to enjoy and at least make a little bit of money. This isn't good. You know, the interesting thing about that story is the district superintendent was my father. And my dad looked up at me and he said, David, just be obedient to the Lord in all you do. I put the keys back in my pocket. I went home, and it was a couple weeks later on a Sunday morning, as I would do, and I still do it this day, I like to go to where I'm going to speak, and I like to pray. And that Sunday morning, I went into the church. And when I went into the church, I did what I do, and I went down to the altar, and I knelt at the altar. And as I knelt at the altar by myself, I just cried out to God and said, God, I got to preach today. I don't feel like preaching today. There's not a fire in my soul. I want out of here. And I'm just pouring out my heart. I'm doing it privately. And I'm perhaps mumbling some words, and all of a sudden, I felt something beside me. And then I heard the voice of an old saint of God start to pray. And as he started to pray for me, he prayed Galatians chapter 6. And he went down through those verses, and he went 7, 8, 9. Be not weary in well-doing, for in due season you'll reap if you faint not. And old brother Charles Gray, when he prayed, let me tell you what, everyone came to attention. It was like heaven stopped for a moment. And as he began to pray over me in that moment, something happened. It wasn't a gradual turn. It was an instant turn. That there was a blessing of God that came down, and I sensed in my spirit, you are to stick the course. You are to stand firm. Let nothing move you. Always, for the rest of your life, give yourself fully to the work of the Lord, because you know your labor in the Lord is not in vain. And I came this close to missing the opportunity to see the hand and the work of God because of one man used by God who picked me up and carried me in that moment. Do you need somebody to pick you up and carry you? There's a whole bunch of people here, we'd love to carry you today. Is there someone that you need to pick up and carry? Maybe it's time that you unretire. You unretire from spiritual kingdom work and simply say, God, I'm going to help someone stand strong. Let nothing move them. Father God, thank you for your word. Therefore, my dear brothers, stand firm. Let nothing move you. Always, 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 even when you don't feel like it, even when your body cries out and says, I can't do this anymore, even when your emotions are at the bottom of the barrel, always, always, always give yourself fully to the work of the Lord. Because you know your labor in the Lord is not in vain. Before we go, anybody here in this room right now that would say, Dave, I'm kind of thin. I'm kind of low on my fuel tank right now. And I'm kind of at a low spot right now. And I just need the uplift that can come from those who are around me. And you just take your hand and you'd slip it up and say, right now I'm kind of in a flat spot. We all go through seasons. I've been there many times. And you're here and you'd say, I'm in a flat spot. You just take your hand and you just lift it up and say, before we go, could you just pray that God would touch me? God's so good. Thank the Lord for his faithfulness, the way he works in you. God bless you. Thank you. God bless you. God bless you. Anybody here who says, I really would pray God would give me a mentor, a coach, and someone that could come alongside of me. If you're there and you say, I need somebody, I don't have anybody, and you just take your hand and you'd slip it up right now and say, I've got to find somebody. Anybody here who says, God's kind of tickled me and said, maybe you need to come alongside of somebody and be more attuned to that. And you take your hand and slip it up and say, you know what? I'm going to do a better job of reaching out to someone. God bless you for your faithfulness. God says, I want you to keep your eyes on me and know that your labor in the Lord is not in vain. Stand together with me right now. Rob, lead us as we sing together. Would you do that?